Chapter 3. Knock, knock. Captain Jack Harkness shouted the action as he put away his sonic screwdriver that he had used to open Torchwood 3's many security features. A cry went up from the center of the house and a frantic scrambling. "Jack! Come in!" Mallory called, energetically bouncing through the door from the high-tech living room into the hall. She was grinning. "You came back for your coat?" Mallory gestured to the hooks by the door. "Yes," Jack nodded, giving her the once-over. "And also to see you." Was it 1992 again? Black tights, black DMs, holy denim skirt, tartan shirt over a Nirvana t-shirt. Hair disheveled. When had she last slept? "I forgot," Mallory cried, sadly. "I forgot, oh. I am such an idiot." She hung her head. Jack held out a hand and she took it, lifting her face. "An IQ of 300 will prove you wrong." But Mallory laid a delicate hand on Jack's shoulder, looking past him. "You didn't bring them?" Mallory looked around, worried. "No, Mallory," Jack smiled, sympathetically as relief spread over her features. She looked up to Jack, relief making her smile back, then stood aside, pushing open the door which took them into the living room. "I may have a high IQ but I have no EQ." She handed Jack a plastic box lifted from the desk on which 2 computer monitors sat, and 3 keyboards. "EQ?" Jack asked, looking round. They needed the language module, and Mallory had just fixed it. Only one existed in the world, and what he held in his hand was the only one in existence. "Yes, I just read about it." From the glass-topped coffee table, mid-70s design, she passed him a copy of Just 17 from October 1993. "Look. EQ, empathy quotient." Jack scanned the page. Then flipped to the cover. "You got your style today from here, didn't you?" Mallory nodded. "Do you like it?" She stood up. Over her tartan shirt, she wore an oversized distressed cardigan and old army boots, the epitome of grunge. "I remember 1992, Jack mused. 2 great guys, demobbed from the Iraq War. He shook his head. "Gotta get back there someday." Mallory smiled, before handing another sliver of plastic to Jack, explaining what had gone wrong with the chip. Suddenly, she threw her hands to her head, crying out at the pain. Jack allowed Mallory to fall into his arms and put her to bed, sitting beside her as she screamed. 88,888,888. "Where were you?" Jack, using the Roald Dahl Plus lift with imperceptibility filter, stepped out onto the upper gantry. He glanced at Owen, who was up to his elbows in the Sontarien again. "Ianto, any chance of a coffee?" he asked, as the Welshman turned his dark head. "You were gone 4 days," Gwen exclaimed. "Torchwood 4, Jack pronounced. "And you haven't done what you agreed, Owen," he accused. "So I had to." "You treated Mallory?" Owen put down his scalpel and looked at his boss, accusingly. "How? For what?" But Jack shook his head. "There was nothing I could do for her, Owen," Jack bit back, testily. "I can't take her to a regular doctor. I sat there with a woman whose head was in torment and there was nothing I could do." He emphasized the I. "Whatever you did does not seem to be working." Owen walked to the bottom of the steps of the medical zone. "Is she taking what I gave her?" Jack nodded. "I was going to go back next week and see how she is," Owen added. "Headaches," Jack interjected. "They are getting worse. Every time she works it's getting more and more severe. Debilitating." "Can't she rest?" Tosh asked, turning from her computer monitor. "Get away from Torchwood 4? Maybe it's the job. Maybe it's being alone. Or working too hard," suggested Ianto. Jack cast Ianto a kenning look. "We need her, I know it, she knows it." "It would help if I knew more about her," Owen suggested, shrugging. "She said Susie was in touch with her," Jack said. "When?" Toshiko scrambled back to her keyboard, and began to search the computer. After a few moments, she looked up. "Nothing," declared Tosh, shrugging. "Look again," Jack demanded. striding over to the mainframe. Okay, Tosh shrugged, running another search. Then, she pushed her chair away from her desk, shaking her head. No. Sorry, Jack. If Susie went to visit her, it's not didn't be records. Well, that's bloody typical, exclaimed Owen. Susie goes to see her. What did Mallory the weirdo give to Susie? Parts for the weapon? For the glove? Hey, don't call her that, snapped Jack. Mallory got a call from Susie, several calls. It put her out. This time, Owen strode to the computer, taking off one medical glove and tapping on the keys, staring intently at the monitor. Nothing, he said, after a few moments, leaning back from the monitor. Tosh gave him a, see? Look. And she told Susie nothing? Gwen pressed. Jack shrugged. I don't know, Mallory won't say, Jack admitted. Well, we all know Susie could be a bit Susie, Gwen commented. Anyway, did you get the microfilm chip, Jack? Did she fix it? Out of his pocket, Jack Harkness pulled the plastic case from his coat, holding it up to the base's industrial lighting. Well. Tosh held out her hand. Not just fixed it, Jack said, marveling at the computer sheet. As thin as a tissue, as complex as the web. She made it and wrote the translation programs for all of our language devices it works with. He carefully passed the case to Toshiko. When anyone speaks, we get the translation in seconds. Jack walked across to the mainframe's primary interface, punching up the software to watch Tosh's installation of the delicate module. She knows more languages than anyone in the whole world, plus countless alien languages. Bingo. Jack whooped, as the computer absorbed the module into its being. Mallory Collier could speak 10 languages before she was 7, 31 at 10, mathematics was like coloring into her. She got it all from her mother. Ren Smith, Ianto murmured. He looked as if he were concentrating on his monitor. Then, he broke off and stared at Jack, before plowing on. She fell out with her dad, Ianto continued. I remember her. But then he fell silent as painful memories resurfaced. Moments later, he added quietly, because of Ren, Mallory was on Torchwood 1's radar, so to speak. Jack nodded, but did not acknowledge Ianto's testimony. Roderick wanted Mallory to go to university to study languages. But she rebelled. Rebelled? Owen questioned, sipping his coffee. Like, went on a bender? Took drugs? Shagged around? Jack looked at Owen, and smiled wryly. Took bioengineering, physics and chemical engineering. At the same time. University? Mallory? Gwen narrowed her eyes. Why not, Gwen? Asked Tosh, standing up to the bitchiness. Just because being a copper doesn't need qualifications. That is totally untrue, Tosh. Gwen shot back. But Jack stood up straight and continued his discourse, and they fell silent, glowering to one another. Her tutors were worried about her, ever socialized, never went out. Of course, Owen muttered, sarcastically. Then, she met Mark Jones, married him aged 20. Never been out of her house before, and suddenly, the whole world opened up to her. Broke her dad's heart. And then ... Mark. Prompted Ianto, thoughtfully. And her dad became ill, Jack replied. Mallory went back to nurse him. So, she speaks Japanese? Tosh brightened. Didn't you hear what he just said? Owen shot across to Tosh, sarcastically. Speaks every language in the world. She wrote the programming for it, every algorithm, for every possibility, even predictive functions. Jack clarified, still monitoring the progress of the module installation. The organic computer was going to absorb the program into its neurons and reconfigure itself. If it were a human, it would be like an intensive lesson all in one go. So, what was wrong with it? Gwen asked, looking over to Jack's screen. She probably did it wrong, or it wasn't as infinite as she thought, Owen replied, staring out of the frosted glass window. The Sontarian had gone cold now, ruining the autopsy. What a waste. Hardware, said Jack. A layer of graphing was out by 2.3 picometers. He fixed Owen with a stare. Her program is perfect. Quantum computing decades earlier than what is being developed now. What programmers are doing now are baby steps compared to what Mallory's in the middle of the 90s. Not only did she solve this, but had improved on her own prototype so that all 4 Torchwoods had alien language tech in 1998. Nah, come off it, Owen declared, doubtfully. Look at her, dressed as she was in a bag of jumble sale clothes. She couldn't be more mismatched if she tried. She doesn't see people, Tosh put in, suddenly. And the earlier language program she gave us that we used to imprison the invading alien species is flawless. It integrated with Sophie as if it were meant to. Tosh looked at her screen, nodding with approval. Sophie? Gwen asked. I gave her a name, Tosh replied, defensively. I spend a lot of time with her, I thought she needed a name. Tosh looked as 4 pairs of eyes looked at her. She seems like a Sophie. Anyway, what does it matter? Mallory's a genius. She puts what I do to shame. Still weird, though, grumbled Owen, beginning to sterilize his instruments, wondering whether the quantum incinerator could cope with yet another Sontaran corpse. She could be pretty if she tried a bit. If she fell into social convention, you mean, Owen Harper? Tosh challenged, getting up. She began to stalk towards Owen, who was walking over to the step, towards Tosh. Jack stepped between them. No matter how bizarre you think her clothes, or strange you think her behavior, just make sure you do follow up on that appointment next week, Owen. We can't afford to lose her.